Hi guys, we are out in Wembley, Western Australia at my most recently completed project. It is a character home and we bought, renovated, subdivided and are selling this home in just over 12 months. The first home open is booked for this weekend and we are seeking offers over $1 million. Now, you might be looking to complete your own renovation or you're keen to get into property development as a wealth creation strategy. The other option is you could be midway through a project and just looking at how do I make certain decisions, where do I spend my money. In this video, I'm going to go through tips and tricks as well as mistakes on this particular project so that you can gain that knowledge in completing your own projects and know where to spend your money to get maximum bang for your buck. So let's get into it. Now I'm going to step out of frame to give you guys a bit of an idea of curb appeal. So I always say the best thing to do is spend most of your budget on curb appeal. Consider about 30% of your budget going to the front facade, the landscaping, maybe rendering a wall. And that's what we did in this case to maximise the exposure when we're taking photos for the home open and people are coming to drive past. But most importantly, when people rock up to the home open, that's the first thing they look at. Now, budget is a big factor on any project and we want to make sure that we get the workmanship done right up front. We maximise the wow factor when looking at the home. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is selling features. And in Wembley, Western Australia, similar to many inner city areas, parking is a premium and a lot of our competing product actually had tandem parking or parking off street, or it was very hard to access or get into. So what we elected to do is to create a very large hard stand environment where you could actually have a trailer or camper van as well as two cars side by side, which means that when buyers walk in, it's not necessarily a cosmetic thing or aesthetic thing that we've done to curb appeal, but it demonstrates a point of difference compared to a lot of other stock on market. Now, concrete is probably the cheaper of all options. We have honed aggregate or paving is probably more preferred, particularly in the higher price points. But with this area, we needed to appeal to those buyers, but we didn't have the budget to go for that finish. So instead we elected for concrete, but what we did to make sure that it looked well for buyers when they came into the property is we used a recycled paver that we covered around the perimeter. We also used it on the garden beds and we used it in paths, and we picked this particular colour so that it actually ties into the colouring of the brickwork of the house. I'm going to get onto the front finish and give you a few quick tips. So firstly, you can go for tuck pointing down on the brickwork, but that can be very costly, particularly if scaffolding is involved at height. So we elected for an acid wash to get rid of the bore staining and getting the bricks to about 80% of what they would look like if we did the tuck pointing. With the pebble render, you can again go for a modern render, but once you paint it and patch it, it actually looks pretty good and presents very well in photographs. Talking about saving money, sometimes it's actually important to spend money. Behind me we had an old asbestos fence that we had removed and replaced with ColourBond. Now we could have gone with the ColourBond all the way down, but we stopped at the hardy fence because that's safe, and we actually colour matched that hardy fence so that the difference in colours didn't really impact the curb appeal, but we were still able to safely get rid of the asbestos. Try and keep what you have. So we have frangipanis and some other trees and shrubs that went down the side of the property, which we maintained and tied into the landscaping of the front house. Out the front here, what I wanted to show you guys quickly is some of the things we did. We actually had this solid brick wall rendered and painted. We can't modify it too much because of council rules. We'd either have to have it removed or keep it as it is. We landscaped around this tree area. We tidied the trees up and then we put down pea gravel. But a little trick we used is rather than just putting out loose pea gravel, we compacted so when people park on the front or come to home opens, you don't have pea gravel pellets everywhere while we're showing the home. We rendered the front of the front wall, but we didn't render the back, halving our render costs, and that saves about $600 or $700. Then we just painted it the same colour on both sides. Now, it looks very good at the front and good at the back, still presents very well. What we wanted to create is actual wow factor, so we invested in spending a bit of extra money on a swing and sliding gate, so that way the new buyer can actually have access to their entire yard and be able to put almost any car or caravan on that front hard stand parking. We say to people, anytime there's laser light sheeting for $60 a sheet, it's always better to replace it. Doesn't matter what the condition is, because it lets more light in the house and it presents much better than stuff that's been weathered in the sun and storm. I couldn't help but do the cheesy entry video, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the colour selection. We use an interior designer, and for the cost I highly recommend it. To get them to just do a colour sheet is not that expensive, but what it allows them to do is pick colours that are warm, inviting, and don't sanitise the house too much. Sometimes when I've done projects in the past and select my own colours based off colour swatch, the colour scheme becomes very clinical, whereas this has a bit of fun elements like the green door. With any character renovation, it is super easy to pull everything out and replace it with new. The problem with that is you can blow your budget very quickly. And in this project, it is a development, so our budget is very important. To make sure that we stay on budget, what we needed to do is look at some of the elements in the home that we had to keep and look at some of the elements in the home that we wanted to improve. But once we completed those improvements, we wanted to make sure that the things that we kept don't look worse, and that's the hard part. The reason why I say this is that paint colouring is one of the things that change how your house is showed off, and that can be impacted by the flooring you choose, the height of the ceiling, the features you want to showcase. So in this example, and I always encourage it, go for a simple colour scheme. We used 3 different colours of white. We had a wall white, we had a feature white, and we had a ceiling white. What we realised is when we were showing off the high ceilings is that the door frames, being a standard height, started to look low, and it wasn't because they were, it was because there was a contrast between the high ceilings and the standard height door frame. Now, they were Jarrah, so instead of keeping them Jarrah, what we did is we used a feature colour white, and what the feature colour white did was it blended the door frames into the wall, but being a feature, it still highlighted the fact that they were ornate. Because our budget didn't permit it, we had to look at working with more of the original features in the ensuite than what we would have liked to. But what I want to talk about is the things we did change to give you ideas of what you could do for your property. First things first is the cabinets. As mentioned, we're going to get rid of a lot of those Jarrah elements of the property. So we painted this the same colour as the kitchen cabinets and replaced the knobs. All the original carcass of the cabinet was very good, so we kept that. We actually replaced this toilet. Now, this is a little tip. So when you're looking at replacing a toilet, you may not want to be replacing the toilet with the same size toilet system. What you want to look at is you want to look at a larger system and a larger ceramic base. So when you're actually ripping out that, and you might damage some of the tiles, what you can do is you can put in the larger system on top. I'm up here now and I just wanted to show you the tiles. Firstly, they weren't actually that offensive. So the colours that we picked, wall colours and things, we wanted to make sure match these tiles because we weren't going to replace them. When we did the initial inspection on the property, what we wanted to do was look on the other side of the shower screen inside the walk-in robe to make sure that there was no moisture ingress into the wall. Moisture ingress would suggest that the waterproofing from the tiles is no longer any good, but in this example it was fine. So that made me think, well, rather than pulling out all the tiles, redoing the waterproofing and then retiling, what we have to work with is making sure we put a bigger toilet in. We don't change the shower screen, but what we did elect to do was change the tap work and fittings so that it matched a bit more of a modern feel and giving it all a very good clean so that when the new buyers walk in, they know that, yeah, it's an original bathroom, but they could quite comfortably enjoy it and be able to move in. Okay, this is a quick side tip, but when buying a property, think about those points of difference. I mentioned the double hardstand car parking at the front of the property. In this example, the property actually had that ensuite added in the 1980s, as I just mentioned, but it also had a walk-in robe. Now, character cottages in this area, almost none of them have a walk-in robe, which makes it a little bit of a point of difference. But again, when you look at those extensions and renovations, make sure you go to council and pull the records to make certain that they are council approved. As I walk to a different area, I just wanted to say that if you're renovating a house for yourself, the style that you pick is entirely up to you. But if you're planning on selling it or conducting a project, the best thing to do is keep it neutral. So I'd be keen to get your feedback on what style tips you have for this particular property by commenting down below and giving me some insight on what you would have done differently. The reason why I'm on this furniture brings me to my next point, staging the property for sale. Now, we used a very basic colour scheme with 3 whites, and the reason why we did that is we wanted to use furniture and the house itself to show off the colour. But staging is also important when it comes to showing the size of a room. If you're trying to show off the height of a ceiling, what you want to be doing is putting up large photos at a high height, and that gives you an idea of how much wall space you have. If you're in a room that's quite small, that's a bedroom, then if you don't have a bed in there, when people looking at the property, it always looks much smaller. And when you're on realestate.com and you have a house with no furniture in it, it can look very bland and basic. So what you're trying to do is appeal to as many people to look at it and go, wow, that house looks amazing. And furniture can do that, particularly if you use a very basic colour scheme. In this house, it was a little bit tricky working with the flooring. The reason being is, firstly, it's 220 square metres, so any changes to the flooring is costly. And also there was that 1980s renovation. So this was another room that was added on in the 1980s. And a little hint of that is this wall here, you can see, is actually quite wide, and that's because it's a double leaf exterior load-bearing wall, and they've punched through that to add this extension on. Now, you could go for tiles and you can go for concrete, polished concrete. It would be quite modern, and we were thinking originally polished concrete. But what we elected to do at the end of the day was actually go with direct stick Jarrah. And the reason being is the floor underneath me is quite hollow, and that's because that is a suspended Jarrah floor, and this is solid. So it is a concrete poured floor. We picked the direct stick Jarrah flooring for a couple of reasons. The first one being that we were already going to get someone out to polish the existing floorboards. So if we install the direct stick, bring the same person out to polish both the boards, then of course we would save a little bit on labour there. Now, it is more expensive to get direct stick Jarrah flooring than probably tiles and concrete, polished concrete, but if we have matched the actual thickness and colour of the Jarrah, when you go from one floor to another, there's no real delineation. So in this example, we have 3 different rooms, a lounge room, a living area, and a dining room, where it just looks like it's one continuation of that same room space. So it opens up the whole house, and being that it's a large home, we're showcasing that fact by keeping the flooring consistent across the whole area. Another quick tip is when the electrician came in to replace the lights, we got them to replace the face plates on the light switches and power points. So this way, when the buyers came in and tested out those light switches, they all function really well. Moving on to the feature brick wall next to me, we painted that the same colour as the plaster wall so that it drew attention away from that feature brick wall. Okay, we are in the kitchen, and this is a good example of where you can spend some money to maximise the wow factor, but also keep some of the great original parts of the house. In a lot of these old homes, the original Jarrah carcasses are actually much better than you can buy that's flat pack. So we kept the original Jarrah carcasses, as you can see behind here, and we actually had the doors sprayed, sealed and sprayed, so that they appealed much better to the end buyer. The cabinets had the knobs replaced with a modern copper style. So again, using the interior designer to give you some ideas around what colour selection you should have. And the copper as well was brought into the tap. In fact, the tap was selected first, and then we brought in the brass elements in the handles afterwards. This dishwasher was actually the original dishwasher that was sold with the house. Now, the previous seller only recently bought this before she decided to sell the house. When we went out and bought an oven and a cooktop, what we decided to do is pay a little bit more and get Bosch, and that way we have a package that all looks of the same brand. So if your buyer's fussy about a mismatch of different brands, we're able to showcase 2 brand new appliances with a fairly new appliance that all matches as one set. Now this box range hood is a good example of where we're tying in new elements and old elements together. Box range hoods are actually fairly modern style in a lot of new display homes, which have been inspired from old character cottages with the old cauldron burner. Now, we obviously didn't have this, so what we did is we installed it because we were thinking if we went for a stainless steel range hood and we have brass elements, it might clash. So we used a new element that's inspired by old elements to tie in with a older style, but yet renovated and modern kitchen. I brought you to this shot to give you a quick example of the before and after. wanted to share with you some tips and mistakes on this particular project so that you don't make the same mistakes on yours. Firstly, the laundry. I actually might go to it. So this was my main mistake on this particular property, and I'm actually going to cover the mistake in a lot more detail on the development version of this project video. But basically this bathroom was almost twice the size, and we structurally modified it to make space for the rear subdivided lot. Now, the expense was not in the subdivision. We had actually considered in due diligence, and we had factored in the cost of the structural changes in our feasibility at the start of the project. But the main expense was the non-structural elements that we would normally do ourselves, new flooring and painting. We actually had to engage a builder for the structural elements, and technically under the BCA, that means we have to engage the builder for all the works of the property. So we ended up, for the extra expenses, adding some building margin on, and across the whole project, it doesn't sound like much when there's 15% building margin, but it does add up on every single last thing that you buy. But look, it saved me some time, and we did consider it. But if I did it again, what I might do is look at the structural elements and then try and separate the non-structural elements, provided it's all done correctly, out of the building contract. Okay, mistake number 2 would be the kitchen cabinets below. We primed them and repainted them with a colour. Probably if I was to do it again, I would seriously consider looking at staining the cabinets rather than painting them. So using like a very dark stain and changing the colour scheme maybe a little bit. This means that the cabinets will be a lot more hard wearing, but remembering that we kept that Bosch dishwasher, so we might not have been able to do that with a white dishwasher and dark cabinets. So I don't know if that's a mistake. The final thing is a sliding gate. We deferred that decision for quite a long period of time. It's about 15 grand to get 11 metre long sliding gate and a 4 metre swing gate. We actually had a bit of issues with it. We went to a fencing contractor, they quoted it all up. This particular council, which we were aware of but didn't think impacted side sliding gates, had a fencing or streetscape policy, and so when we had it all machined and completed and installed, when council came back and inspected that fence, they told us that their fencing policy doesn't just apply to front fences, it also applies to side fences within the front setback area. So for another $1,500, we had to remove the fence panelling and replace it. So that would be another mistake, along with deferring it. And probably if I didn't defer it and made the decision up front in due diligence, we would have found that extra consideration in the streetscape policy of the council. So that's it. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed this video.